It's on, the Reckless Renewables Rally, 11 o'clock on Thursday, November 30th at the top of Martin Place in Sydney. Country and regional Australians are calling for a moratorium on the rollout of environmentally destructive, unreliable, unaffordable wind, solar, battery and high voltage transmission projects. There will be speakers from Queensland, country and regional New South Wales, Victoria and South Australia. Bring your flags, banners, signs, voice and ears to show your support for country and regional Australia. What's at stake is our food security, energy security and ultimately our national security. Looking forward to seeing you there. Together we will prevail.
No one has ever shown that human emissions of carbon dioxide drive global warming.
We have a Marxist power, and it's the power to say no.
They put all these words on these flyers and it means nothing. It's garbage. We're all going to die!
Doctors are gaslighting patients.
If you keep silent, then this is what's going to happen. And they'll make us silent.
I would rather paper cut my eyelids than have an
We are one people, one flag, one Australia.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the ExCandidates. My name is Stephen Tripp, joined by my good friend Adam Zara. How you going tonight, Adam?
Well, pretty good, Stephen. How you going, mate?
I'm all right. Pretty good, actually. Last week we had Tim James on, the Liberal member for Willoughby, and I've got to say it was a really good interview with Tim. But not only was it a good interview, but he also pitched in on our Buy Me a Coffee afterwards. He bought us 5 coffees, believe it or not, Tim James. I think that's just a class act, don't you think?
Yeah, I think it was really good. I thought it was a breath of fresh air, actually, because, you know, with current state of affairs between, you know, the Liberal and Labor governments and things like that, I think it's really important to be able to see our representation in person and actually get like a one-on-one without any sort of agenda. We always say it, the ExCandidates has no real agenda as such. Like we hear, you know, we want to get people's perspective. We interview experts and we have very special guests and we just want to hear their perspective and their point of views on things. So we're not trying to actually manipulate any sort of information that's coming out to you. I thought, yeah, Tim James was a stand-up guy and, you know, I wish him well and I thank him very much for the coffees. I'm still buzzing from all the coffees and then we'll see how we go from there. But yeah, it was a breath of fresh air and I hope there's many more like him, you know, in all the parties. I hope, you know, from what we see in the media to what we see and to what we see in person, if you have like good family orientated, you know, reasonable people who are prepared to listen in government, I think that can only lead to good things in the future.
And if you would like us to have more sitting members of Parliament on, maybe suggest some names in the chat or send us a message. We can't guarantee they'll come on, but we can definitely give it a shot.
What you could do is send a message to your local member with our details and say, hey, why don't you approach these guys and get them and see if they'll take you on the show instead of us having to chase everyone all the time. Well, I got to be honest with you. I've only probably chased a couple of guests. Stephen does all the work with all that kind of stuff. He really does. I'll give him some ideas or something every now and then, but Stephen's the one who does all that kind of stuff behind the scenes. So thank you very much for that, Stephen. And, you know, I'll have to buy you a coffee one day, I reckon.
Maybe. I don't drink coffee, but
I'll get you guava juice.
My guava juice, yeah. If you would like to support us, I'll put the link to Buy Me a Coffee in the chat. I mean, it's just an open thing. If people want to chip in and help us out, then that's completely up to you. It's just something that we'd be stupid not to put something there. So it's been very successful so far. So we thank everyone that follows us. But if you do want to take that extra step, Buy Me a Coffee is there. Right now we're live streaming on Facebook, YouTube, and Rumble. If you're on our Facebook and YouTube, you can comment live. So if you want to ask our guests a question, you can. I'll also put the link in the chat later throughout the interview. If you want to call in and ask us a question or our special guest a question. So it's completely interactive. The ex-candidates, we're moving more in that direction. So please, if you want to get involved, we're very happy for you to do so. But on tonight's episode, we've got a returning guest, one of our good friends, Rod Lampard. He's a writer at Caldron Pool. He also contributes for the Spectator, Dads for Kids, and the Canberra Declaration. He joined us twice before on episode 69 and 45. So if you want to go back and revisit those episodes, you can go back in our archives, especially episode 45. That we went through a lot of Rod's history and his journey, so that's a good one. So we won't really go into that tonight. But firstly, Rod, how are you going, and how's Caldron Pool going? It seems to really be going from strength to strength.
Yeah, we're doing great. And I think with the way it's been going, I think it's been beneficial the way Elon's taken it down that road. So, I think it's freed up a lot of the censorship that was there, especially during COVID. I mean, they did a lot.
Yeah.
And we know that because Robert F. Kennedy's called that out. He called that out in January. He's got a lawsuit. I don't actually tried to look that up and see how that's going, but there was no news on that yet. But the Trusted News Initiative, it's called.
Yes, that's right. And
I nicknamed it the COVID communications cabal because alliteration is just too cool, right, to miss out. But yeah, it's exactly what it is. So, yeah. But he's arguing that it's anti-competition. So, yeah, when you look at that, these are Caldron Pool and you guys and a few other platforms that are out there, and we're sort of small fish, and these guys don't want us succeeding. That's just flat out. And it is, I don't think it's about misinformation or disinformation. I just think that they want to dominate, they want to monopolize. And I think that Robert F. Kennedy's argument was just spot on. And it was very, very, I think, very clever the way he argued that and put it forward. So I'm hoping that lawsuit sort of shines or stands out somewhere else. There's a lot been going on in the last 12 months with J6 and Trump's indictments and things. So I guess the media over there is a little bit more concerned with trying to bury that sort of story, the Robert F. Kennedy one. So.
Well, speaking of censorship and the media, you really helped us out during the no referendum, the voice referendum. We were on the no campaign. This article that you wrote in Caldron Pool was speaking about an article that the Guardian put out against Kerry White, who's an Aboriginal elder that we've had on the show, and it was referring to the interview that we had with her, and you really went through their article and just completely picked it apart and destroyed it. And I think this was a fabulous article that you wrote for Caldron Pool. Firstly, I guess we want to thank you for doing that and taking on that story. But also, do you have any comments about what you wrote?
Well, I think in hindsight, there's a few. Because at the time, the information we had about who voted for what in the Northern Territory was still fresh, and an analysis after that, I think, showed that there was a little bit more different to what I'd written on there. But I think that this what I said, the integrity of it still holds. I think that the fact is the Guardian went after this lady, and it wasn't just her. I mean, there were others the Guardian's done to, but they went after Amanda Stroker. She stepped in to take over from a stalwart up there. He's a Christian guy, and he's pretty. From what I can tell, he's loved by the community there. And they just stepped up the heat. Like, she's anti-abortion, she's anti-women, and all this. I mean, this is a mum who's stepping out from the home to go back into the workforce to serve Australians. And here is the Guardian, the pro-woman, gender gap, gender equality Guardian, the lefties and stuff saying, oh, well, this woman, she's not the right woman. She shouldn't be in politics. She can't be there. So it was really I think it's an anti-woman diatribe from the G. I think they've done it twice. I think they've done it more. I guess if I dug more into that, I'd find more articles about how they just, anti-Stoker. But I mean, the way they treated her was just atrocious. And it wasn't like an article that had a lot of information in it about where she's at and what she's doing and what she's achieved. It was more like nitpicking her political views and her beliefs. I mean, there's no tolerance in that, and there's no balance. It's just bias, And I think it was a privilege, I think, to I took it as a privilege to step up and basically say, hang on a sec, look, this isn't right. and point out exactly what's going on there. And I've got a lot of respect for The Guardian. I mean, they've got a lot of good writers, but some of their content, just like the ABC, I think it's definitely steered towards a narrative, and we've got to call it out. That's what we do, and I think you got to speak truth to falsehood in that respect. So, it was. I think with the no vote, with the no vote win, as I said, I called that a death by double standard. The yes 23 loss, simply because you saw the whole way they carried on. Debate is hate, and the government was partisan. There was no bipartisan equal platform for anyone. And if you disagreed, you were racist. Then we had them calling that racist, and then they doubled down and said, "Oh no, it's misinformation." But they didn't actually say that, and then everyone's calling it out again. I think X, coming back to that first point about X and Elon's takeover of that and the transformation. I think the transparency that he's allowed, or through this push for the defense of free speech and defense of free speech versus forced speech, is very. I think it's integral to the overall debate across the globe, not just for us nationally, but and I guess locally that even comes down to that as well. But there's evidence of that fruit of that platform where people can be more informed and things like that about what's going on. They're not just hearing one particular view of it or one particular narrative. And I mean, again, it's like I think what I encounter a lot is your headlines often sell the piece. But people are going to move beyond just reading the headline. They've really got to jump in and read the articles, because that's where the references are. That's where the content is. That's where the context is. And I find that, I wrote one on Jordan Peterson, the arc, and I kind of got hammered about that because I said that the arc, Jordan Peterson's arc, will fail without Jesus Christ. And I'm really just echoing the points of Ian Hersey, who was talking about Christendom and the Christian foundations of the West. And how basically echoing what she said, but sort of expanding on that, saying that you can't have a Christless conservatism or a Christless Christianity that's bounded or grounded in Western civilization. And how that comes back to the voice is you've got the basic fundamental freedoms of association, debate, free speech, freedom of conscience, freedom of religion, those sort of things. And I just recently wrote about Louise. In Tasmania, Hobart, the councillor down there, city councillor, who's being taken to a tribunal because she refuses to call a man a woman.
Which is basically freedom of speech anyway, right? They can't have it both ways, yeah?
Well, look, I think it's the movement. I think the far left behind it. We saw this from 2016 to 2020. There's a double standard at play. They want to legislate a love for their ideology, a love for their movement. They want to legislate, I guess, a way to convert everyone to their way of thinking, the hive mind, or as Elon Musk has called it, the hive mind virus, the woke mind virus. Sorry. So I think overall, when you're looking at the details of these things and working through it, and every week I'm encountering the details and going through them. There's some articles I won't write because I've looked at the grounds and they're just too sketchy. There's not enough information to really formulate a logical or reasoned response. So we have to wait until more information is available before we act on that or speak about that, I think. And that's just following the basic rules of logic, reason, and for Christians, basic biblical theology. You speak truth in love, and you gently correct, and you're not afraid. Don't be afraid to speak your mind and call out something or an injustice or something like that when it's happening. But the left doesn't get to define what injustice is, like with their social justice platform. For I think the Western civilization, for a very long time, the judicial system has been based on God's justice. And we look at the Ten Commandments as part of a covenant that writes or rules for a relationship. Both one with God and one with neighbor, with family, with all those vocations that come into play. I think one of the problems with our society and the downgrade that's happening is because you've had this attack on both the matriarch and the patriarch, and that male-female relationship, that family, as we were discussing with the article I put up just recently on Z Van Fleet. She's a warrior. She's a mom. 2021. She's Loudoun County, an American lady who she's a refugee from China, but some amazing stuff that she's got to say. And she really, she calls out cultural Marxism basically as the cultural revolution. But she's very careful to not say, well, that's exactly what this is. But she said there are rhymes with it. And she talks a lot about the Red Guard and how the Red Guard were children. And if you want to get really into the parallels, just look at what happened in Melbourne this week with the, river to the sea, Palestinian flag everywhere, not an Aussie flag anywhere. The school kids took a strike and did that. I mean, what principle would allow that? What sane principle would allow that? And obviously we have, as the Australians pointed out a few times in a few articles, that the university systems in Australia are really just producing Marxists, cultural Marxists. They're not producing educators. So we have these apologists for the left who are being trained to go out and proselytize this oppressive versus oppressed narrative through what's called critical race theory, intersectionality, where there's always an enemy and the enemy is always wrong. So that's why they don't want debate. That's why debate is hate, because if you have an opposing viewpoint, which again is the basics, the foundation of logic and reason, and I would argue biblical Christianity, because of where our freedoms come from, the base concrete foundation, which informs us about our morality, such as objective morality. But you have a lot of what's called that moral relativism, subjectivity, something that C.S. Lewis called out in the 40s as poison. He called subjectivism poison. It's really a great essay if you get a chance to read it. It's quite illuminating. I mean, he can be a bit tough to read sometimes, a bit chewy, but in this one, I think he's to the point, and you see the parallels with that, So and it's not just Z Van Fleet either from China. There's we got, I think, Day Lai. She's the Vietnamese Australian MP who wore the traditional Vietnamese dress, all in the Australian flag. You wouldn't see a Green senator do that or a Greens MP do that. And it was hard for them to call her a racist or her patriotism as being some kind of right-wing white supremacism. I mean, she in her maiden speech was amazing, and I was a bit sad she didn't get up and really speak out a bit more about what was going on during the Yes 23. Really, the emotional manipulation they were throwing up, the bashing of Australians as idiots and racist and ignorant and whatnot. It would have been good to see her do raise her voice a bit more about that. But I understand she's got to toe a certain line, I guess. And
I think she, because she's local to me, well, not quite local. She's a few districts up, and I think what happens is I think they pick the battle. I think they let basically the No campaign do its work. I think a lot of politicians who are on that side of the fence kind of said, well, Jacinta and Warren Mundine, I mean, they're the ones to really kind of speak out on it. You know what I mean? Like they're the ones who that's their ethnic background. That's their it's their culture.
It's their voice.
It's their voice. You know what I mean? That's true, right?
Yeah,
so then it's a bit hard if you've got a Vietnamese lady, MP trying to speak out on it. But I get what you were saying.
When she's saying like the Australians are racist, I think when you look at her maiden voyage, she's thanking Vietnam veterans for serving them. Those guys came back, man. They were spat on. Yeah, they were killed, baby killers. Yeah, I mean, come on. And it took him years to be white, because at the time there was a prevailing ideology coming out of Frankfurt, saying that, hey, you're all bad people. It's it. And then so it's that the fruit of that is kind of what we're seeing today, this abandonment of objective morality, this moral ambiguity that's being accepted, this moral relativism where truth is whatever you want it to be. And, I think it's deadly, because it often breeds that double standard. I mean, like I say, with misinformation, disinformation, and that bill that they want to put out, how can they say what misinformation and disinformation is if truth is relative, right? If your truth is your truth, how can that be disinformation? They've got no grounds. They've got moral or logical grounds with which to argue what misinformation and disinformation is. Therefore, it's got to be what the government says is truth, based on this subjective relativism.
But I mean, that's why the left that's why the leftists always falls over kind of on them, really, because they contradict themselves in the thing, like you're saying, like your truth is the truth, but then if they want to, like, obviously with this disinformation bill, they're saying, well, that's not the truth now, this is the truth.
Yeah.
So
basically, if it doesn't fit the political narrative, then it's misinformation. And if you're dissenting against that, then that's disinformation, and therefore you should be punished and whatnot. Yeah. Which is kind of what Z Van Lee is talking about when she says that's what happened in China. And I mean, the video we've embedded in there, it's quite good. There was another one that I could have put in, but I think this was the better of the two. And I mean, it goes for, I think it's about 45 minutes or something like that. But if you click on the article, it should be in the bottom of the article. But it's a really good one to watch if you want to know more about Cultural Revolution in China and hear it from a primary source, not through, some neo-Marxist or cultural Marxist teacher at school or in university.
Well, we were going to talk about Javier Milei first, but you really did send me down a rabbit hole with this G Van Fleet interview, and I watched
really
the whole thing. It was fantastic. Yeah, I've got a clip ready, so we might just play what she says right now. This is from a podcast called Educate Freedom, or this is their YouTube channel anyway.
Until probably more than a decade ago, I started to see dangerous signs, the signs that remind me of Cultural Revolution, and get worse and worse until 2020. And it's no longer signs, it's full-blown Cultural Revolution. What I saw, what everybody saw on TV of the BMM, Antifa, burning our cities, terrorizing our communities, that's Red Guard.
Yeah.
I said, I cannot stay silent anymore. And as an Asian immigrant, we are mostly very quiet. It's just part of the culture. We learned very young age, do not, the lesson that my parents or every parent teach their children is disaster come out of your mouth. Just be quiet, don't say anything, and you'll be safe.
See, that's the problem. That's what they've been taught. Don't say anything, because it's so your speech is so dangerous in these countries that you can be killed. It's that I mean, that's just the reality. I mean, your whole family can suffer from the things that you say. But she did bring up there's a saying that if you don't learn from history, you're doomed to repeat it. But when in school do they teach you about the Chinese Cultural Revolution? They teach, and there's a part in this where someone messaged her and said, "I've learned about racism and I've learned about Nazism, but they never teach us about what happened in China." They want to
look at Hollywood, man. There's a great book called Hollywood and Nazism, or Nazis in Hollywood. Hollywood and Hitler, sorry. Robert Doherty, I think it's Robert Doherty. Anyway, I did write an article on it, but it was a long time ago, so it's a bit unfresh in my mind. But basically, Hollywood had an anti-Nazi movement up until the point where you had the von Ribbentrop Agreement, which is basically, the Nazis and the Soviets signing a pact to tear apart Poland, which is what happened. And so they worked together. And if you look at the history of the communists in Germany at the time, they were like, we'll let Hitler do his thing because we actually agree with a lot of what he's saying, because Hitler was a socialist. I don't care. I know he was a fascist. Well, fascism in Italy and Spain, it's origin. He took lessons from those countries, but ultimately he was a socialist. He was a Marxist. He was, all that stuff. I know when people shoot me down for that, go ahead, but go and read some articles, go research it. Look up. I can even point you in the direction if you want. That's just a fact. But yeah, I mean, if you look at that agreement, so in Hollywood, the anti-Nazi movement, once it happened, it suddenly disappeared because the communists were on side with the Nazis, right? So then there's this movement sort of, no, we will have to suppress all the anti-Nazi propaganda because hang on, we're a little bit confused here, what's going on? So they stopped that. And then, obviously later on, Stalin goes, well, I don't want to share Europe with Hitler, so I'm going to join the Allies and then rip it apart and conquer when, Hitler stuffs up, which is what happened, right? So they're very, very good at, I think, convincing. And I think a collective mindset or the psyche of the West has been programmed to view communists as good, as anti-Nazis, which is what they called the rampart, the Berlin Wall. It was an anti-fascist rampart. So this is all Soviet propaganda, right? And the West it's infiltrated the West, and so history is kind of a bit muddled, a bit grey, a bit foggy. And so you have the communists portraying themselves as liberators, and that's why you have this. And you have that from the North Vietnamese, North Koreans, right down to North Vietnamese when they broke the Paris Peace Accords after the Americans pulled out militarily, which is where the fall of Saigon came from. That they viewed themselves as liberators, right? So and then millions suffered greatly because of that. But again, you had and that's, I guess, to point that out, that's something that David Horowitz, he was a communist, and he was one of the anti-war protesters. He was one of the campaigners for that. He was the head guy. He was even connected to the Black Panther Party. And if you read a lot of his stuff, he fills in a lot of these gaps and shows his concern about where that ended up. So when the communists took over, the anti-war protesters disappeared. So all this slaughter of millions in Vietnam, they didn't care. Right? They were suddenly silent. I mean, so you get all that, like these protesters and these school kids in Melbourne, and you go, do they really know what they're protesting for? Are they really 100% behind this stuff? Do they have all the information? I don't think they do. And I think it's because that, our education system doesn't teach civics, theology, or Christian theology and basic, reason.
Let's expand on that, because I was at a conference, the Australians for Science and Freedom, last weekend, and they brought up civics, and they focused on, why we need to reintroduce that into our education system. And I remember you speaking about it on it was either the last time we had you on or the time before. It may have even been both, because I know it's a big part of what your focus is: civics, logic, and theology. Do you want to maybe just start with the civics and explain what that is for people that might not?
Okay, very, very simple. Richard Dreyfuss, Richard Dreyfuss, Mr. Holland's Opus, yeah. Well, he's lefty, right? He's full on left, but he's got an initiative called the Civics Initiative, and it's really good. I mean, he teamed up with Eric Metaxas, a Christian guy, he's also a columnist. He's written a huge amount of articles and a bunch of content on Bonhoeffer and a few other things. But in this particular situation, he teamed up with Metaxas, so they're politically not aligned at all. But on this issue, they're agreed that civics is lacking, and basically what that means is kids being taught about the structure of their government, how they're governed, and why they're governed that way. That's the separation of powers, for example. Does anyone know what they are? The legislative, executive, and judicial. And what is the law of the land? Well, it's the Constitution. That's highest law in the land is the Constitution. And the separation of powers are meant to, we talk about separation of church and state. Well, separation of powers is different to that. It's a different category altogether, because it's not quite separation when you talk about church and state. But yeah, those three are meant to be independent, so no one can sort of take over, and they've all got to be subject to the Constitution, the highest law of the land. So when for example, just to give an example of that, when informed consent was trodden on from 2020 to 2022, it still is in some cases. In the Constitution, you see that medical conscription. It sort of outlaws that. That's the highest law in the land. So that's why it went to the courts and the higher courts. I'm bewildered why it lost, because it's pretty plain, it's very, very plainly spoken. So why on earth did it happen? Well, Augustus Zimmermann would probably say, well, the Constitution needs reform. He would say that the judges are picked by the politicians in some respects, so therefore they're going to do what the politicians want. So there's a compromise between the executive, legislative, and judicial. So you could call it corruption, maybe. Probably too much of a strong word. I don't know. But yeah, he said some stuff that I think is really good about that particular issue. And Gerard Rennick is another guy who's on board with that kind of thing about constitutional reform and how important that is. Because you have a lot of legal eagles who get in there and they twist the words of the Constitution to make it say what they want it to say, and that kind of thing. So, as far as I understand it now, I could be wrong about that particular statement, but from what I've seen, and if you use the medical conscription as an example, when they say, well, it doesn't actually mean medical conscription, it means something else. That's what I read. That's what it's in. Every Aussie who picks up the Constitution or gets their free copy if they can, just ask the government, I'll send you a free copy of the Constitution. I've got like 5 books here. I've given some to my kids, and we've looked at it. It's there. So yeah, so civics is really just very simple about how we're governed, why the system exists that we have. So due process, those kinds of things. I mean, I got a quote here from Richard Dreyfuss, which basically says that we either teach kids to run the country or someone else will teach them to do it. And it'll teach them their way. And so I think you have this issue with cultural Marxism, which is Stephen Shavara, I'm sure I said his last name right. I always get it wrong. Sorry, Steve. He pointed out one time, and I thought it was really good, that Western adults and Western parents shouldn't be surprised when their kids rise up and denounce them before the government, as traitors or whatnot, because they're not paying attention to what the kids are being taught. And that comes back to Z Van Fleet, who is paying attention to what her kids are being taught and protested that at a school board meeting. And for her pains, she was called a domestic terrorist by the United States government. Well, I should say Joe Obama's Inc., right? Because that's who's in power, yeah? So, and you know all about that stuff. If you're not a Democrat, look at his speech in September last year, basically paraphrasing him, not quoting him directly, but paraphrasing the content, intent of his speech. If you're not a Democrat, you're a domestic terrorist, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So, and that was his unity speech, right? So, I mean, come on. And so I think that the discerning voters, we need to teach them, raise them up, and we need to. The only way to do that is civics, biblical theology, and man, I'm forgetting the third one there, but yeah, it's part of that, civics and reason and logic. Logic is the other one, and there's some great resources for that. I got 2 books if you're interested in. You can check it up. They're on Kindle. Go get them if you can. It's the Thinking Toolbox and the Fallacy Detective. Both of them are written by 2 brothers called Nathaniel Blueborn, and they're published in 2005. And I've used those as teaching aids for my kids, and I recommend them. They're really easy to work through. They're age appropriate. You examine all sorts of things from straw men to loaded questions, that kind of stuff. And in the Thinking Toolbox, it just gives you these ideas about when does an argument become a fight, how to formulate an argument and to go from there. So the steps are basically discussion, disagreement, argument, fight. So when an argument gets to a fight, it's pretty much time to walk away, sort of thing. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, before we move off this, I want to do 2 things. One, play a clip, and then show an article. So just bear with me, because I think this is really important, especially if we're talking about civics and theology being taught in our schools. Well, the opposite is happening, because they're teaching the kids woke and all sorts.
Actually, it's not the opposite, because Marxism is a religion. And I'm not. Well, that's not my statement, man. That's a statement by Simone Weil. She said this. Marxism is a badly constructed religion. They're her words, and she's an ex-Marxist. So she's French lady, but yeah.
So they're just teaching the wrong religion.
False religion.
Let's see what Z Van Fleet has to say about it all.
Could get the record. So from earlier on, we were taught that the party and Chairman Mao was our real parents, not your own parents. Your parents gave birth to you, but your real parents are the party and Chairman Mao.
Would they directly say that?
Oh, no, that's not direct say. We are taught that we sing songs. And one of the songs is Father is dear, Mother is dear, neither is as dear as Chairman Mao. And they're still singing it today.
So that's the first clip. But then there's also this article that the IPA brought out I think it was this week. It was recently anyway. And it says, who teaches the teachers? An audit of teaching degrees at Australian universities. Now, this article says that almost a third of all teaching subjects are woke. Of the 3,713 subjects currently offered to teaching students, 1,169 subjects teach critical social justice, which includes diversity and inclusion, Aboriginal education, social and emotional learning, sustainability, and all those sorts of things. Now, on the flip side of that, fewer than 1 in 10 teaching subjects are about literacy and numeracy, Of the 3,713 teaching subjects taught, only 371 subjects are concerned with developing core mathematics, which was 218 subjects, phonics, 43 subjects, and grammar skills, which are 37 subjects. So that's what's happening with the teachers. And I go back to a saying that I've brought up before on this show, that the best manipulators are the ones that have already been manipulated. So they're getting the teachers in the universities, and then the teachers are going into the schools and passing this on to the students.
I think, to be fair, not all teachers would do that. I know that there was one guy who spoke up about it, and again in an article for the Australian, and then they had gone and questioned the university, and the university just gave them a scripted response, basically, that we give all these things to the teachers, the ones who grow out to be teachers, the grads, and we do our best to make sure that they have a balanced approach to things. But the evidence suggests otherwise. And you see, I mean, if you want to go, where's the evidence? We'll look at Melbourne, last week. Look at the look at the S23 campaign. I mean, look at the Greens wanting to drop the vote to 16.
But I hear what you're saying. Rod, because, not all teachers would follow that Marxist ideology and stuff like that. Okay, I get that, right? But so little don't, I think, is the problem. It's not balanced. You mentioned one in particular who stood out against it, and then he went up against the university, and then the university gave him a scripted response, right? Yeah, why isn't there more than one? Why is there only one in this particular?
Well, maybe it's
every 10 years.
I think what Z just said that. She said the reason you're taught not to speak up.
Yeah,
you're taught if you do, you'll be punished. I mean, look at my daughter's doing a certificate 3 in a subject at the moment, and she's going through all this cultural sensitivity, cultural safetyism. It is woke to the core. How on earth does that benefit children? In the field she wants to study in, but she's got to go through this in order to try and prove to the examiners that somehow she's safe. Somehow she's okay. She agrees with this, and she won't get her certificate if she doesn't agree to these things. And I think you find the vaccine mandates, right? That's just not about vaccines. This is about wokeism as well. Like in universities, it's being applied. It's a woke mandate in many respects. You've got to tick these boxes, otherwise you won't work. Yeah. I mean, for Christians, I would say, if you're familiar with the mark of the beast, I'll say it's a mark of the beast territory. I'm not saying it is the mark of the beast. I mean, don't shoot me down. I'm saying it's in that theme. It's in that box. It's in that bracket where you're being given or being forced to accept a false savior or alternative savior, or worse, an alternative Christ, where you are deluded into thinking that this is the Messiah when, it's really just a man. Look at Nazi Germany with the Hitler Youth. The communists had their own version of this. And you just saw what Z said about the Red Guard and Mao's, little red book. That's all they had. They didn't have the Bible. They didn't have anything else. I remember Michael Palin. If you ever get a chance to hear his documentary on North Korea, he's very tactful and very careful in how he does things. But when he got to the border from China, I think it was, the first thing they asked him, do you have a Bible? Didn't ask him, do you have a gun? Didn't ask him if he had drugs.
Had a Bible.
Do you have a Bible? Because they wouldn't let him in if he had one. They wouldn't let him. Well, that's because Marxism is a religion. It's competing, right? It's Christ or Marx in many respects. And so, I could go on about that, but yeah.
No, but it's kind of like, I know that there's a movie about it. You probably know it, The Book of Eli, right?
Yeah, I've seen that. Yeah.
With what Denzel Washington or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, I don't know. I didn't dig it too much, that movie, but it's kind of like they're fighting to find a copy of the Bible, okay? And without a spoiler alert, it's because modern civilization, or where it's the one book that changed the face of the world, fully revolutionized the world.
I would say that it witnesses to the one man who changed the world. Yeah.
But you know what I'm. All right. So So you're right. So, but you know what I mean? Like it's kind of like the playbook for building a successful, pretty inclusive civilization that can be very, very successful under the teachings of God, right? Would that be right?
We're promised if we look at Psalm 107 is a good example here, because it talks about the people going down the wrong path and they're calling out to the Lord, and then he comes and saves them. He is with his wondrous works and his wondrous hands. So the ancient Israel, they knew about this and knew this, and they knew that a nation's success is in the hands of God, because God is, he's omnipotent, he's all knowing, he's all seeing, and the state wants to be that. You saw we got a taste of this during COVID, which is where you get the statement "God over government" and the protest. That song by Jimmy Levy, I think it is, "God over government." It's a good song. I mean, it's solid stuff in that. Christ is King is another statement that is being, I think, murdered by the left because they are associating it with white nationalism, and so they're claiming that Christian nationalism is white nationalism and all this sort of stuff. So they're clouding the issues with their subjective reason. They're not actually arguing the point; they're arguing the man. So that's straw man stuff, fallacy stuff. It's nowhere near logic. It's designed to achieve a certain goal, and that is to delegitimize your enemy. And this, I think, this ties into Javier Milei. Where he was hammered by the left. I mean, this is a power tool politician. You saw him with the chancellor, right? I mean, how many politicians and bureaucrats? How many bureaucrats have had their hands on power tools or ever used them? I mean, you can see like Anthony Albanese with a jackhammer just getting into some concrete. Man, I don't see that happening.
It'd shake out his denture, I reckon.
What about Adam Brandt? I mean,
that guy.
I
wish he would and just rattle
his
away.
Hands dirty.
Yeah. Well,
across the screen.
you brought him up, Javier Milei, and this is his response to how to treat the left and how to go up against the left. This is from Sky News.
Al zurdo no le podés dar ni un.
¿Puedes definir zurdo de? No
todos los que, digamos, los colectivistas, los que ponen, digamos, o sea, esa idea. A ver,
¿por qué le pones de mierda?
Porque son una. O sea,
no,
pero es que si pensás distinto te van a aniquilar. Ese es el punto. Es decir, vos al zurdo no le podés dar un. Porque le das 1 milímetro y lo toma para destrozarte. Es decir, digamos, o sea, vos no podés negociar con el zurdo. No se negocia. No se negocia con esa mierda, no se negocia porque te van a llevar puesto.
So for people that are listening and they can't see the subtitles, what he's basically saying is you can't give the left an inch. You just can't back away.
They'll kill you. Basically, he says it. They will kill you.
Well, is he wrong? I mean, is he wrong? What did he just say? What does Van Fleet just say?
Yeah.
There's someone who's lived it. There's someone who's lived it. And that's primary source. It's not being made up. She's a mom who was taught to be quiet all her life, and she's now behind a microphone. She's written a book, Now's America. I mean, man, something's stirring within the hearts and the bellies of the people, and I would call that God, man. This revolt is God revolt against this growing tyranny, which you could call the woke world economic Fourth Reich.
Yeah.
It's Trump really, I think, blew the lid off the charade, the masquerade which you had with Obama. I mean, they're using behavioral science to control people, and Obama's like he's a king at it. Using behavioral science in order to win you over. Yes, we can. What do you mean by that? I can't go and choose my own. I can't choose my own. Well, look at Obamacare, right? That was issues with that apparently, and you couldn't choose your own. What is it, the healthcare fund or something like, because you had to do something or something or other. It's vague in my mind because it's so far back now. But Trump blew the lid off the whole charade of the WEF, and I think that they've been working behind the scenes probably for since 2016 to get rid of him. And that's where you see so much hate from them. The double standards. Look at the BLM riots, which is what Z talks about, and Antifa. Oh, Antifa doesn't exist. It's just an idea. We're looking at it on the screen, and there's guys marching down the street with flags and whatnot, right? No, hang on, it does. It's just like them saying safe and effective over and over again, expecting you to believe it. And many people did because there was fear behind that. And fear is a lot more powerful motivator than freedom. So they're happy to surrender their freedoms and go with that. But if the majority in Australia stay silent, we're going to end up with serious issues. about where our nation's going and those things. And especially because we're so close to communist China, and you look at what happened with the Darwin port lease, the Albanese government backed down, then it's a national security issue, which is what you talked about in that video at the start with green energy.
Fake
I mean,
renewables.
it's crazy. Like, I was talking to the guy about EV, and the government was like, "Oh, you've gone up, like they've shot up to 8% now." It's a sort of a buzz going around about these EVs, and they're proud of the fact that they're now 8% of people are buying these EVs. And I was like, that's just weird, man. I mean, you've got to have the infrastructure to hold one of those, and that means you have to have a garage, or you're going to power it by an electric, a long extension cord. It's got to be safe. And the bigger, those extension cords, the heavy duty ones aren't cheap. They're about $177 at Bunnings. If you want even better ones, they're about $200 or something. You've got to have the things in place to be able to charge that safely. And then an electrician got on to my comment. He said, well, that's not true. You don't need infrastructure. And I said, well, if you want it to be cost effective, you're going to need solar, right? And then he said to me, oh, they charge the 30% charge overnight. I get a petrol station, fill it up, and it's 100% charged in like 5 seconds.
Yeah,
so
that's right.
Do you know what I mean? It's hang on, what are they selling here? K Bono, right? This is again logic, and the kids aren't being told K Bono who benefits. What's all this about?
Look,
I don't know. Have you seen the truck or the new one that the Tesla's released?
The
Cybertruck thing.
Cybertruck.
The Cybertruck. Yeah. No, but look, you know what? I'm kind of like, I don't really care about electric vehicles or not, right? So like, I'm a petrol head. I drive V8s. My car gets out of 60 liters. I get less than 300 Ks a tank. I don't care. I don't care. Okay. But I don't care if they bring electric vehicles to the market. Just don't feed me the crappy line that it's better for the environment. Yeah. If I lived in a place where, maybe I'm running the kids to and from school only, okay, and I can work from home, okay, I might have that sweet job where you can sit at home on a computer and work from home. So I just run the kids to school and back, and I don't really need anything too special. I don't do road tripping or anything like that. Maybe an EV might be good for me because I'm not going to have to worry about fuel costs and such maintenance costs. There's no moving real parts. You only got to wear out tires and brakes. There's very little servicing to these cars because I've got some mechanic mates who talk about, I've got a mechanic mate across the road, and he's bought 2 EVs because he's like, I just don't have to work on them. Fair enough, okay? But don't tell me I must do it to reduce a natural gas in the air that feeds plants to save the planet, and then drive up all other costs. Like they're driving up fuel prices, they're driving up electricity prices, they're driving up all these prices on the basis of saving the environment, and you must have an EV. All you're doing is transferring the pollution that comes out of an exhaust pipe in a car when you're using it to manufacture. So basically, you're just moving the pollution from one point to another point. But at the end of the day, the things that I've read, and and I can't quote studies and stuff like that, but the things that I've read and that I tend to believe, it says that a regular car anyway, still a petrol operated car, is still more, in the end, produces less carbon dioxide overall, or less pollution overall than an EV. Because you've got to think about where you're getting the materials to build the battery, where you're getting the materials from. One part of the car is built over here, one part's built over there, one part's built over there. They ship it to bring it all together. Then they ship the car on those massive tank, all over the world. And then to be honest with you, you're going to probably get about a 10-year lifespan max out of that battery. And from what I heard with other mechanics and stuff,
you got to charge it using coal.
Well, you've got to charge it using coal, so you get an emission from that as well. Well, a supposed emission, but as I said, I don't believe carbon dioxide is a bad emission anyway, since there's 15% more greenery on Earth because there's more carbon dioxide. So, right. So, but
make this argument: charge it with the solar panels and the wind farms, and how much mining and material emissions have to go in.
They can't produce enough energy. I wish I saved it.
What happens when they've got to ration it out, the energy, because there's not enough? Everyone's charging their cars, and there's not enough solar. There's not enough wind.
Anyway, the cities can't do the infrastructure anyway, because apparently they draw as much power in a charge as 30 houses do in a day. So it's like, imagine if you charge, there's a mad meme or a little video going around like social media at the moment. And if I knew we were going to talk about this, I would have saved that video, because like it really depicts it quite well, because he's just using numbers. You know, it's 30, I don't know, it's 30 megawatts or whatever it is to charge the car. That's about what a house uses or something like that in 24 hours, whatever it is. There's all these numbers that he uses, okay? If you ever get to see it, it's really good. If I find it, I'll try to put it into, I'll send it to Stephen to put it into the link in our thing.
I've got nothing wrong with people owning like Teslas or whatever, you know.
Yeah.
But forcing it on everyone else or legislating it on everyone else, I have an issue with that.
That's exactly what I was saying. Far more poignant than me, Rod, but that's what I was saying. I don't care about it. Just don't make me get one if I don't want one, and don't make it so expensive for me to have a petrol car based on lies.
Yeah, that's right. It's based on some contested science, not scientific consensus.
Yeah,
and it goes back to Javier and what he's trying to do in Argentina with I guess this libertarian push to say we're overgoverned. We have so much government. Like, why is the government telling me what car I'm meant to drive? Yeah. Now, I guess to finish up on the new Argentinian president, I read this article that you'd wrote in Caldron Pool, and it was a great article, and that's probably a big reason why we've got you on tonight. But you've called him the punk rock politician personified in Argentina, and it's probably a fitting description. But do you think that he's got a chance to reform the country? I know he doesn't hold complete power there.
He doesn't hold majority. He's trying to form.
No, I think it's gonna be tough. Yeah. I think he's got a lot going against him. Just like I guess like Trump right now. I mean, they're trying to get him off the ballot and stuff like in Georgia. So,
but think about. Colorado voted Trump in to be on the ballot, I heard. But think about the policies that this Javier is having. Okay, so he wants to get rid of their sovereign currency and go to the US dollar.
Yep.
Because their currency is worth nothing.
Well, he wants
142%, 143.
Yeah, they want to get rid of the pesos for the US dollar.
Yeah,
the guy's an economist. I mean, he's university educated. This guy, he's also a prolific writer. He's written books. He knows what he's talking about, and he might be able to win over if he was able to form a coalition. He might be able to win over the apparatus, the state apparatus, and the people who are in there. The problem is, I think, it's like nearly, I wouldn't say it's nearly 100 years, but it's pretty close. The socialists have been in charge for a very long time.
Yeah, that's right.
And you've got like it's only like a generation between us and, you know, this sort of anti-freedom, anti-classical liberalism or anti-Christ-centered classical liberalism mentality, which is called from Marxism. And that's what's happening in our schools right now, I think. And you see it with the woke agenda. You see it with the woke push. And what we mean by woke is critical race theory, the intersectionality stuff, the legislating of love. You could call it that, legislating of love. You've got to love, and it's illegal if you don't love, but you've got to love what the government tells you to love. And you've got to love who the government tells you to love in that sense, right? There's no balance, there's no freedom in that. It's a very closed off thing because they then define what love is. And we saw this in 2017 with the same-sex marriage, redefinition of marriage. And you have the ground for that. And we know that that's opened Pandora's box for many other things. And you're seeing trans tribunals coming up now. You're seeing a bunch of other stuff from activists within the lobby group there and everything else. And then they are trying to legislate, like I said, force this conversion. And in many respects, like Marxism, I think the LGBT cult, if you can frame it like that, and I think you can, and we're talking about the collective mindset here, not individuals in particular, those who are part of the activist class in that movement, there is a certain amount of totalitarianism in that, and I think it's dangerous. I think that we need to, the only way to push back against that is have the courage to speak up, which is why Maura Deeming and who I've called, you know, the group that she's with, the team Deeming, I've called them, Louise in Tasmania, we just mentioned her earlier, but you know, her fight with the trans tribunal down there over what you could say is a blasphemy law. She refuses to use someone's preferred pronoun. Well, really, when you look into that, and I did, it actually comes back to politics and political opponents trying to just oust her from the council. That's really what it comes down to, I think. It's not about someone being offended as much as it is them using that as a tool or weaponizing that as a tool to remove her. A little bit like what happened to you, Stephen, with that forum. They weaponized the anti-vax concerns or the concerns from pro-freedom protesters in order to get you removed from that forum. So then you didn't have a voice and could not voice dissent. So it's again, you're coming back to disinformation, misinformation, you're coming back to the World Economic Fourth Reich and their ideas of pushing forward this sort of momentum of, I suppose, fascism or totalitarianism. And I would call it it's a false religion on all grounds. The woke social justice mentality is a false religion that preaches a false Christ, an anti-Christ. And what that means is it's an alternative savior, one that will lead to the worship of a leader, the worship of an ideology. You see that in Marxism, like I said, with North Korea and Michael Palin's example. They didn't ask him at the border about whether he had a gun or anything. It was, do you have a Bible? Because biblical theology is a threat to Marxism, and I think that you have a lot of these, other religions under freedom of religion. It thrives in this country because you have that level of debate through freedom of speech, and you can engage in different conversations, different kinds of ways. But when you start having the law being applied unequally, as you are in the United States now, as you are here through diversity, equity, and inclusion, which again is just wokeism. And I've written a couple of articles actually about two black Americans who were diversity and equity inclusion officers who've rebelled against this. They've rejected it they themselves became victims of this ideology. And hang on, I'm being forced to hate white people here, and I refuse to do that because that's counter to what I thought this was all about. And so, I think with Javier, I think what the term shock treatment is why I think that there's a certain amount of punk rock in that, because he's using that you see the guy with the chainsaw, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, it's that obviously theatrics. I mean, he's a TV star. But I mean, I think that's part of his ability to attract people to his policy platform. And there's a certain amount of, I don't care about appearance, I care about substance, which is almost countercultural in the West, in a big way, because everyone's all about, appearance is not substance, reputation versus character, these whole things. And even with love, love is it's whatever you want it to be, and it's the rejecting the whole, and the government defining that, like we talked about, rather than it being something that we are taught through an objective morality, an objective word spoken to humanity, which confronts us, and we call that God's grace in confronting us through his covenant, through Christ, and that bringing us back to a point of this is the way we should go. As I said, Psalm 107, and we err with that if we go in a different direction or a different way that's counter to his will. And I know there are different opinions about that, but if, like C.S. Lewis said, it's either lunacy or it's Lord, basically. And we either accept one or the other. And I think if you see that since the 60s, as Z points out in her talk, you have had this cultural revolution since the 60s in the West, slowly taking shape. And you have the removal of logic, Christian theology, and civics from classrooms. There's no debate. There's no, there's no thinking about how we're governed and why we're governed. And I think one of the things I like to sort of instruct my kids with is tell them, if you don't take an interest in government, you'll be governed outside of your interests. And I think there's a lot packed into that, and you could spend probably another hour sort of taking it apart. But that really is why civics is important. And I think that's why Richard Dreyfuss and Eric Metaxas have pushed for this, equally on this a bipartisan kind of discussion about this, and saying, well, let's get back to this and bring this back into our schools because it's fundamental to the freedoms we have. It's also a door by which we allow and empower children to live wholesome, full lives, free of government intervention. And in the concept, as the ARC talks about, the Jordan Peterson guys were spot on about this, of freedom and responsibility and how those two come together. And you can't really have one without the other. So, as far as that goes, you look at civics, again, the difference between a subject and a citizen, we're all becoming subjects, no longer citizens. And I think with COVID, we sort of threw away that citizenship and became subjects of this globalist empire headed by the, again, World Economic Fourth Reich. Yeah. So we've got to be careful about who we surrender to or who we listen to in that respect. And I think when we don't empower our kids with the truth, someone else is going to come along. As C.S. Lewis actually warned about this in The Abolition of Man, he said, we either water the garden or the kids will be prey for propagandists when they come knocking. And so I think that The Abolition of Man was, I wouldn't say it was prophetic. I'd say there's a lot of prescient stuff in there that's relative to what we're doing, to what we're seeing today. And again, C.S. Lewis just shines us how he is. He spoke into the culture back then and speaking today. I guess it's the context, because back then you had the Nazis, which was a pseudo religion, moving in that direction. Himmler was behind all that stuff. He wanted to create an Aryan religion and get back to sort of the pagan roots of Germanic culture, sort of thing. And that empowered the Nazi views and the Nazi worldview. I mean, it's a bit different to, say, Soviet Russia, but you still had that same thing where we talked about earlier about how they were very, very, very capable in their narrative to control their oppression and their murderous lies. I mean, Marxism is murderous, and there's no doubt about it, but they were able to make it shine like an angel of light. They were able to put a shine on that and sugarcoat it. And that's why you have today a lot of the young guys saying, socialism is the way. Well, hang on, we've got to listen to Z, we've got to listen to De La, we've got to listen to Channing Lau. I mean, these are victims of communism that we're just throwing to the side like we did the Vietnam veterans and go like, you don't have a voice. We don't want to hear you. It's interesting that the grievance cult, who preaches grievance politics, you've got to be a victim all the time, don't want to listen to real victims, which is a lot about what they're selling and who they are. I don't think they're really concerned about victims and the oppressed and oppressor at all. I think it's just it's a political tool in order to divide and conquer. So, and
just saying, I did have to, like, during my political campaign, stuff like that, you get this Marxist, socialist, communist kind of talk. So I did a little bit of research to try and figure out what the differences was between them. There's very slight differences. They're very similar across the board, pretty much. But it's all state is power and all that kind of stuff. But the funny thing is, when they talk about it, they talk about, like, infamous leaders of those movements, Hitler, Lenin, and all that kind of stuff, right? And but they all have a story about being touched by God. So, like, Hitler said that he was spoken to by God when that grenade didn't go off in his when he was saved from the grenade in World War I. And that he was spoken to by God to do this, and that was his drive. That was his driving to do it. So then, basically, what they do is you're talking about religion and how ideology and the communism and Marxism is a religion, and we're getting comments where no, it's not, and all this kind of stuff. But I kind of do agree with you that it is a religion.
Well, see, they're not my words. They're not my words, right? This is from an actual Marxist. Simone Weil, look her up. She was a French Marxist. I mean, and a French communist. She was that. She was a part of it. And even you go look at Jacques Ellul. He was a communist. Look at David Horowitz in the United States. He was a communist. They all say the same thing. So I'm sorry, but you're wrong. The guys who have actually been there, the guys who have lived this, are telling you that it's this. And if you're not going to listen to them, that's on you. All right. Don't complain about the West falling apart.
But I do kind of agree with you in the sense, though, because what happens is that they kind of propagate that word of God, and then make people people worship gods. You know what I mean? And so they try to elevate themselves to God via the word of God.
Yeah, it's what's called natural theology.
They become, everyone looks up to them, like what that lady in that clip that we showed was saying, is that they are the God that you listen to, you know. So it's all state and it's all government. But so I do feel the same thing. I think it is more of a, you know, you believe in a God. I'm not talking about our religion, but believe in a God, and then they try to propagate that they are the God, and then everyone worships them. And that's what you can see, because then they just treat them like subjects, and then they basically starve them to death, even where they're not. Even if you take away where people who speak out go missing, the random thefts of people and children, especially in all those kind of times of socialism and stuff like that, they starved their population to death while they grew fat in their ivory towers.
Holodomor would be a good example of that.
Sorry?
Holodomor would be a good example of that. I think it's what you're talking about is what's called natural theology, where there's a confusion between the creature and the creator. And so, you know, there's that stick over there is God, we must worship it. It really goes back to the ancient Near East in the Old Testament. Well, you can really sum up the Old Testament as Yahweh fighting against the gods of the ancient Near East to liberate humanity from these superstitions and these false worships. So we're talking about child sacrifice with Molech and Baal and sexual immorality, which destroys nations. I mean, we're talking adultery, homosexuality, all these things, which is why it's sin. It's a rebellion against the created order, and it confuses the creature with the creator, right? And you get the creature making the decisions about what's right and wrong, what's morally okay and what's not. Subjective relativism, which is what we have today. And there's quite something you find quite a lot in the Old Testament. Everyone was doing right in their own eyes. And there's a rejection of objective truth, an absolute truth in that sense. And I think like you have talk about punk politicians and how that sort of comes in. I mean, Bob Dylan in his early days, you have to admit that this guy was kind of like the seed of that. He was kind of the early punk rocker. He was a bit folkish and stuff like that with just his guitar and his harmonica. But you know, he went through a gospel phase, and one of the songs he wrote was, "You've got to serve somebody. It may be the devil, it may be the Lord, but you've got to serve somebody." And as far as the church goes, as far as religion goes, I think we're innately designed to worship, and we're drawn to that transcendent in that sense. This is why you have Jordan Peterson talk about the transcendent and logos, and he just unfortunately just doesn't go far enough to point out who the logos is. He's using the Greek ideas there, whereas Paul goes further and says the logos is Christ. This is the unknown God, and we know he's known. He's made himself known. Like, it's not something I've revealed or something I'm pointing out. He himself has made himself. He has spoken to humanity, and that is through revelation, and that is how he's identified himself. You know, and you can't have every man going around for themselves in that respect, because you then have them naming all sorts of things God, like Hitler or Mao or Pol Pot, you name it. And usually the 20th century was really born from the 1800s, where the 1800s you had this, I would call it a dark Darwinian fanaticism. We're throwing off God. We're throwing off evolution is the way, and we're finally being enlightened. And then you have these issues that it was about conquering mountain monster, myth, and man. And then you have this period of time, and you get to the 1900s, and it's what's called the Belle Epoch, and everyone's like, oh, we've reached the pinnacle of evolution, right? But you start to see the cracks in that when the Titanic sinks. And why is the Titanic such a powerful impression? Why has it had such a powerful impression in the Western mind? There's been bigger disasters than that, but we're still fascinated by this. Why? Because I think it was the first sign of human arrogance sinking and failing. And what happens after that? We have the outbreak of World War I, the war to end all wars. Again, a very arrogant term.
Yep. And
millions die. You know, I mean, we proclaim that God is dead. You know, I know that Nietzsche was doing that sarcastically to some point, but it still is. It carried this sort of theme, this idea forward that we can exist without the one who is and was and is to come. Those kinds of things, and without the subjective word spoken to humanity. It's not about being a slave; it's about being set free. And see, that's why Marxism, I think, in the social justice movement, even the social gospel, is it is that kind of alternative Christ. It's grounded in that natural theology where it confuses the creator with the creature. There are some legitimate criticisms, say from the feminists, for example, but at that point, when you go, well, those criticisms and those questions have been answered, and now you've got the excesses of that, which is transgenderism and the whole LGBT movement, and we can go into that and talk about radical feminists and their ideas and how all that plays into that. I know it's not politically convenient to talk about that, especially the foundations, because that there are people in the LGBTQ community who are against those sort of things, so they don't want to offend those people. But we really have to have these conversations and these about the fundamental issues and the foundation of where these ideas actually come from, who was behind them. They were a fringe in the 70s, and now mainstream. And not only are they mainstream, but they're trying to shut down debate and discussion about it.
You're definitely right. We definitely need to have these conversations, especially when it comes to where we got our foundations from. I think a lot of people have forgotten those, but unfortunately, we're getting towards the end of our discussion tonight. We could probably go for another hour, but we probably should wrap things up. But before we finish, this is like, I'm going to say this is probably the wild card question of the night. I don't know if you'll be able to answer this, but the cannabis poet has asked, what would you say your interpretation of Genesis 1:29 and Genesis 9:3 and Genesis 1:12 is? That's a lot there. So do you have any comments? Can you recite the Bible off the top of your head like that?
Let me look it up. Now, look, what exactly is the question?
That was the question.
Yeah, it sounds like more of a statement than a question, to be honest.
Yeah, okay. Well, we'll let that one slide. But what we'll finish off on is our final segment of the ex-candidates. We've introduced this since you've been on last, so you haven't had a chance to do this yet. But it's called Build Your Own Fantasy Government. Now, Rod, you're in charge of the next Parliament of Australia, and you can choose 5 or 6 current politicians, former politicians, experts, maybe living or dead people that you really revere. But the idea is that you can put 5 or 6 people in charge of the next Australian government to make this country a better place. So who would you choose?
Andrew Hastie's Prime Minister. Amanda Stoker as maybe Defence Minister or Foreign Minister. I think she'd do great as a Foreign Minister. Gerard Rennick, any portfolio would be great for him. Maybe Minister of Defence. I think he'd do really well in Minister of Defence. He can kick out all that work stuff that they're pushing instead of, teaching about how to actually fight an enemy.
How to fight.
And identify one. You can identify someone's preferred pronoun, but you can't identify that particular.
You can't shoot him in the head, mate.
Oh, that's what. Don't identify that jet unless you've identified its pronoun first. You can't say F. You can't say no. Is it male or female?
Yeah.
What binary?
What binary code are you?
All right, back to the question. Okay, Andrew Hastings,
Gerard Rennick. Yeah.
And Amanda Stoker as Foreign Minister. Gerard Rennick as Defence Minister. Matt Canavan as Energy Minister. I think he'd rock that. I don't know if you've seen his stuff, but man, I think he'd rock that. So that's 4. And bring back George Christensen.
Yeah,
give him social services.
Very good. There's a few there that we've had before. We haven't had George Christensen.
I haven't had George Christensen. Yeah. I think we've had Gerard Rennick heard before. We haven't had anyone call out Amanda Stoker before. Yeah. But she's a local Campbelltown. Oh, she was a Campbelltown girl for a while until she went to Queensland. So that's cool. But yeah, no,
I'm pretty sure I've missed one. Craig Kelly might be in the fringe there somewhere. So if you want to go, bonus round, Craig Kelly.
Yeah, he could be for maybe Minister of Health or something.
Honourable mention, there you go.
Maybe Minister of Health or something, you know what I mean? At least we might be able to get.
We need a Minister of Health, don't we? So
yeah. Or if you're Javier Milei, you say, nah, we don't need it. Nah, we don't need it. Nah, we don't need it.
I saw that. Yeah.
I'll tell you what, I just want to say quickly, sorry, that I reckon, the Honourable John Ruddick would have been just like, yes! So, we got a libertarian coming up.
It's going to be a hard road for him, though. I think it's going to be really hard.
Oh, yeah. I don't know if he'll be able to achieve what he wants to, but it might be interesting to see that a lot of the far left governments are starting to get toppled, aren't they? Even maybe not by strength, not by a majority, but they're still getting toppled.
Well, someone asked Nigel Forsyth whether he'd be interested in running for, PM, and he'd have to join the Tories, I guess, for that. But he said he didn't rule it out. So Nigel Farage. Nigel Farage, and he didn't rule it out. So he said that you never know, right? Never say never. So I mean, hey, Britain might see that. We thought Boris Johnson was going to be that kind of leader, but COVID came around and he seemed to crumble like Scott Morrison did, I guess.
Yeah, that's right. Well, one of the things that Javier Milei said, that he said socialist, because they're attacking us so much, socialists make us better. So you can see some people rise up from out of nowhere. And there was a Dutch election as recently as well that the conservative guy got up. So things are moving. It's like the tug of war. It's back and forth.
But then you get policies then you have Italy, even a simple thing like banning manufactured meat. You know what I mean? Like these little, it's those little things, like it's just like that strike back at crappy ideas. You know what I mean? Like let's grow some meat cells. Let's throw a million different chemicals in there, and we'll call it meat. Right?
The problem, the problem is you can throw policies out here, but the next government's going to bring them back in.
But hopefully the change tide, the tide changes, and maybe we can
the only way the tide is going to change, and I'm not saying you're wrong, but I would like to see that. But I think it's got to come from a more core place, and that starts with the human heart. You've got to change the human heart, and the only way I can change that is, I believe, through the gospel as a Christian, and that's what the Bible says. I'm pretty convinced of that. I've 100% lived it out in my life. I've seen it work. The transformative power of the cross, and it's about letting that have a go, letting God have a go, and take the nation forward. That's God first. That's God over government, and then we move from there on to other things. But it's got to come from the human. It's got to start with the grassroots kind of thing, which is what Z Van Fleet says. How do you push back against it? She didn't just go, "Oh, this is all bad." She went and gave us solutions. She said, "Look, the way to do this is to educate. We need to educate, and we have to first of all push back against this quest to censor everybody, or name call an opponent or a political opponent as a racist or a Nazi or a this or a that, right? You got to be able to call a spade, and I think that's what Javier Milei is. I think that's what's so powerful about him. He's not afraid to speak, like Trump, I guess. I mean, he has his idiosyncrasies, there's no doubt about it, and that. But there's you can call it populism if you like. I don't think that's the right term, and I sort of shy away from that because I think it's too easy to label someone a populist. And I think it's misused as well. But in this sense, I think, as I said, that he's got the ability to speak straight to the exact issues that's on the hearts of the voters, and that's what's going to win for him. That's what helped him win, and I think that's what's going to help him take the policies forward. But if you see how the left of you see the machinations of it all, and how the mechanics are working with the left, they're already starting the narrative. They're rolling the narrative like they did with Trump. Trump is Hitler. Russia. And we know all that's garbage, right? Back then it was like, oh, is he? Or maybe he is, maybe he isn't. Maybe he was working with the Russians. But now we know for a fact, 100% hard cold fact, that's complete garbage. It was total. Yeah. That was misinformation and disinformation. Yeah. The guys behind that, some of them are still in flipping politics in the US. I don't understand why, but I'm digressing from the point. The issue is that they speak truth to power in this sense, in a real way, and as long as they can hang on to the truth and the foundation of that and what that objective truth, and I think the policies will go through. But again, you've got to, for even in Italy and in Australia, we have to be able to engage the heart. We have to engage the transformation of the heart with that sense. I don't believe we can do that without the revelation of God, because I don't believe it's within our power to fully change our depravity as humans. The human heart, the prophet Jeremiah says, the human heart is deceitful above all things. And the only way that heart can change is if that heart is pulled out and put a new one in. This rebirth, this new birth takes place, which is being born again. The way we are born again is through Christ, through his his coming and his being. As we celebrate Christmas, it's just around the corner, right? We say Emmanuel when we go to the carols and things like, well, what does it mean? Is God with us? And I think for the West, life with God begins with God with us, and that is Emmanuel, and that is the only way forward. And as I said with that article on Jordan Peterson, we cannot have a Christless Christianity. You cannot have a Christless classical liberal West. It just doesn't exist. It's going to always fail because other religions will come in, other false religions other antichrists will come in and put themselves in that place. And you end up with this serious compromise or syncretism that weakens the foundation, as you're seeing with multiculturalism now, which came into Australia in 1987. And there's huge questions about multiculturalism as an issue. And I think that's part of why Milei's popularity is huge, Trump's popularity is huge. But there are a bunch of multi-ethnic people who back him. It's the competition of cultures that's the issue. And multiculturalism, I guess you could say, is like a cesspool. The way that it's constructed, the way it's been left to run, it's sort of running rampant at the moment, where you got these cultures competing with each other in that sense. So you have, Islamism is probably going to be dominant and that will take over. And so you'll end up with Sharia courts, you'll end up with a bunch of different stuff. And hey, so what happens? Look at France and their issues there. Look at Holland, I think, is an example. And I think one of the key things for the Van Wilders, I think his name is, was that the left paint him as anti-Islamic, but he's raising concerns on a ground level, grassroots level of where does this ideology lead? It's the same as wokeism in many respects: convert, pay a tax, or die.
That's right, and because that's the one that they're going to ban Islamic immigration, aren't they?
Well, look how the ABC are painting him already. Far right, anti-Islam. Like it's always taglines to start off with straight away.
But that's just
as you
name
said,
calling.
Paint the narrative, name call. Yeah, exactly. So anyway, we better wrap things up. I think that was a good point to wrap things up, Rod. Let everyone know how to follow you, because I know you're everywhere with your writing, but what's the best way?
We just general social media stuff. For Facebook, I've got an author page there, and Twitter and Instagram. Yeah,
Twitter. Yep. And I've been putting up all your articles from Caldron Pool, so head over to Caldron Pool as well. Yeah, they're really great. I mean, really good articles. I don't pop on there as much as I should because there's so much news to catch up with, and but whenever I head over there, I'm like, damn it, why don't I come here more often? Read Rod's stuff. So thanks for coming on tonight, mate. We really appreciate it. And for everyone that watched tonight, please share this far and wide. It's as I say it every week, it's really important to share our content out. It helps with the analytics and just getting this message out everywhere. Let people know that we're here and you can come on and contribute, comment and call in as always. And Adam, next week we'll be back again. I think it might be at a slightly different time next week. I'll let everyone know that throughout the week, but we'll reveal that throughout the week. But for everyone, for Rod, Adam, everyone watching, thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.
See ya.
It's on, the Reckless Renewables Rally, 11 o'clock on Thursday, November 30th at the top of Martin Place in Sydney. Country and regional Australians are calling for a moratorium on the rollout of environmentally destructive, unreliable, unaffordable wind, solar, battery and high voltage transmission projects. There will be speakers from Queensland, country and regional New South Wales, Victoria and South Australia. Bring your flags, banners, signs, voice and ears to show your support for country and regional Australia. What's at stake is our food security, energy security and ultimately our national security. Looking forward to seeing you there. Together we will prevail.